The moment the empath realized their power, everything changed. Carl Jung discovered something that would terrify every manipulator who has ever preyed on empathic souls. There's a specific moment when an empath realizes their true power, and when that awakening happens, everything changes. Not gradually, not subtly, but with the force of a psychological earthquake that reshapes every relationship, every boundary, every interaction they'll ever have again. Jung documented this transformation across dozens of cases in his clinical practice, and what he found was so profound, it challenged everything we thought we knew about empathic psychology. He watched gentle, giving souls who had been systematically exploited suddenly access abilities that made them not just immune to manipulation, but dangerously effective at seeing through every psychological game ever played against them. The most shocking part, Jung realized that empaths don't gain new powers during this awakening. They simply stop suppressing abilities they possessed all along, abilities that were always there, waiting beneath years of conditioning that taught them their sensitivity was weakness rather than the most sophisticated psychological radar system known to human consciousness. Picture the exact moment everything changes. You're an empath who has spent your life absorbing everyone's pain, managing their emotions, sacrificing your needs for their comfort. You've been the emotional shock absorber for every family gathering, the unpaid therapist for every friend, the endless giver in every relationship. Your nervous system is fried from constant hypervigilance, your energy depleted from carrying burdens that were never yours to carry. Then something happens. Maybe it's the final betrayal that breaks you open. Maybe it's the moment you realize you've been enabling dysfunction while calling it love. Maybe it's the day you discover that your endless giving has attracted exactly the people who give nothing back. Whatever triggers it, there's a moment when something inside you snaps not into breaking, but into clarity. Jung called this the integration of the shadow, the moment when all the suppressed anger, denied boundaries, and silenced wisdom suddenly becomes conscious. But for empaths, this integration doesn't just heal their psychology, it activates what I call their empathic superpowers, abilities that were always present but had been turned against themselves instead of used for discernment and protection. Here's what Jung discovered that modern psychology still refuses to acknowledge. The empath's sensitivity was never their weakness. It was their early warning system, their lie detector, their manipulation radar, their energy scanner. Every quality that made them vulnerable to exploitation was actually a form of psychological intelligence, so advanced that manipulators spent years teaching them to doubt it. Jung wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." But for empaths, accepting themselves completely means accepting that they are walking truth detectors who can see through facades, feel through performances, and sense deception before it's fully formed. When they finally embrace this reality, they become what every psychological predator fears most, someone who cannot be fooled. The transformation Jung documented wasn't gentle. It wasn't a gradual awakening accompanied by meditation and self-help books. It was what he called enantiodromia, the principle that everything eventually turns into its opposite. The endless absorber becomes the conscious deflector. The perpetual giver becomes the strategic chooser. The emotional caretaker becomes the boundary enforcer. Let me show you exactly what happens in that moment of realization through Jung's clinical observations. He documented 3 distinct phases of empathic awakening, each more powerful than the last. Phase 1, the recognition. Jung observed that the awakening begins when empaths suddenly see the pattern. All those years of being told they were too sensitive or too emotional when they tried to voice what they perceived. All those times they absorbed blame for pointing out obvious problems. All those moments they doubted their perceptions because others convinced them they were wrong. The recognition hits like psychological lightning. They weren't too sensitive. They were accurately sensitive. They weren't imagining problems. They were detecting problems that others didn't want to acknowledge. They weren't overreacting to subtle cues. They were properly reacting to manipulation tactics designed to be subtle. Jung documented how this recognition creates what he called cognitive reorganization. The empath's entire understanding of their past experiences shifts in an instant. Every relationship gets recontextualized. Every interaction gets reanalyzed. Every moment of self-doubt gets revealed as evidence of their accuracy, not their dysfunction. Sarah, one of Jung's patients, described this moment. "It was like someone turned on lights in a room I didn't know was dark. Suddenly I could see that every time someone called me dramatic for noticing their lies, they were actually confirming that I was seeing clearly. My sensitivity wasn't the problem. Their dishonesty was the problem. And they had trained me to focus on my reactions instead of their actions. Phase 2. The integration. Jung observed that recognition alone isn't enough. The awakening empath must learn to integrate their shadow, all the parts of themselves they were taught to suppress. For empaths, the shadow contains their anger at being exploited, their right to have boundaries, their permission to be selective with their energy, and their capacity to say no without guilt. This integration creates what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold opposing forces in creative tension. The awakened empath becomes someone who can be both compassionate and discerning, both open and boundaried, both loving and strategic. They learn to wield their sensitivity as a tool rather than experience it as a burden. Michael, another of Jung's documented cases, experienced this integration during a family intervention. He had spent years managing his alcoholic brother's emotions, making excuses for his behavior, and absorbing the family's guilt about abandoning someone who was actively destroying himself and everyone around him. When Michael integrated his shadow, he didn't become cruel or unloving. He became what Jung called consciously selective. He could feel compassion for his brother's pain without taking responsibility for his brother's choices. He could love his family without enabling their dysfunction. He could maintain his empathic gifts while protecting his empathic boundaries. The integration transforms the empath from someone who feels everything unconsciously into someone who chooses what to feel consciously. They develop what I call empathic sovereignty, the ability to engage their sensitivity strategically rather than suffer it helplessly. Phase 3. The activation. Jung's most profound observation was that fully awakened empaths don't just protect themselves from manipulation. They become capable of seeing through psychological games with surgical precision. Their empathic abilities, no longer turned against themselves, become tools for reading people's true intentions, detecting deception, and understanding hidden motivations. Jung wrote about Lisa, a patient who had been systematically gaslighted by her partner for years. After her awakening, she didn't need to argue about reality anymore. She could feel his emotional state underneath his performances. She could sense his manipulative intent before he fully formed his strategies. She could detect his lies through micro-expressions and energy shifts that bypassed his conscious control. But here's what made Lisa's transformation so powerful. She didn't use these abilities to attack or expose her partner. She simply stopped participating in his psychological games. Without her unconscious cooperation, his entire manipulative system collapsed. She had become what Jung called psychologically immune to tactics that once controlled her completely. The activation phase creates what Jung termed the dangerous empath. Not dangerous to innocent people, but dangerous to anyone whose power depends on others remaining unconscious. When an empath realizes their true capabilities, they become unmanipulable, and in a world built on psychological exploitation, that makes them revolutionary. Jung identified specific signs that indicate an empath has completed their awakening transformation. If you recognize these in yourself, you've accessed the empathic superpowers that were always your birthright. Sign 1. Emotional immunity. You no longer absorb others' emotions automatically. You can feel what others are feeling without it becoming your emotional experience. Jung called this conscious empathy, the ability to perceive without being overwhelmed. You maintain your emotional center regardless of the psychological chaos around you. Sign 2. Manipulation detection. You spot manipulation tactics before they're fully deployed. Gaslighting doesn't work because you trust your perceptions absolutely. Guilt trips don't affect you because you can distinguish between appropriate guilt and manufactured guilt. Love bombing doesn't fool you because you can sense the agenda underneath the affection. Sign 3. Energy management. You consciously choose where your energy flows instead of having it drained unconsciously. You can engage deeply with people who deserve your attention while remaining completely unavailable to energy vampires. Your presence becomes selective rather than universally accessible. Sign 4. Truth-telling. You speak what you observe without fear of others' reactions. You no longer edit your perceptions to protect others' comfort. You don't absorb blame for pointing out obvious problems. Your voice becomes a force for clarity rather than a source of conflict. Sign 5. Strategic compassion. Your compassion becomes intelligent rather than compulsive. You can love people without enabling them. You can support others without sacrificing yourself. You help from strength rather than weakness, choice rather than compulsion. Jung observed that these signs don't appear gradually. They emerge suddenly when the empath's consciousness reaches what he called the integration threshold. The transformation is so complete that others notice the change immediately, even if they can't articulate what's different. But Jung also documented a disturbing pattern in the relationships surrounding newly awakened empaths. The people who had benefited from their unconsciousness don't celebrate their growth. Instead, they often escalate their manipulation attempts or abandon the relationship entirely when their old tactics stop working. Jung called this the projection crisis. When empaths stop absorbing others' shadow material, those others are forced to confront their own emotional reality for the first time. This is often unbearable for people who have spent years avoiding their inner world through psychological vampirism. The awakened empath becomes what Jung termed a mirror that cannot be dimmed. Their presence reflects truth so clearly that unconscious people can't remain comfortable around them. This creates what I call the relationship sorting, a natural process where authentic connections deepen, while exploitative relationships reveal their true nature. Jung documented this pattern repeatedly. Family members who had used the empath as an emotional dumping ground suddenly find themselves dealing with their own feelings. Friends who had relied on the empath's endless availability discover they need to develop their own coping mechanisms. Romantic partners who had controlled the empath through guilt and manipulation lose their primary tool of influence. The empath's awakening forces everyone in their orbit to either grow or leave. Those capable of authentic relationship adapt and often become grateful for the empath's example of healthy boundaries. Those invested in exploitation typically exit the empath's life with dramatic complaints about how much they've changed. Jung observed that this relationship sorting, while initially painful, ultimately serves the empath's highest development. They discover which connections were based on genuine care versus psychological utility. They attract new relationships with people who appreciate their authenticity rather than exploit their sensitivity. But Jung warned about specific pitfalls that can derail the empathic awakening process. He identified 3 dangerous patterns that prevent empaths from fully accessing their power. Pitfall 1. The revenge fantasy. Some empaths, when they first realize how they've been exploited, become obsessed with exposing or punishing those who hurt them. Jung called this shadow possession, becoming identified with their suppressed anger rather than integrating it consciously. Jung wrote, "When the shadow is not integrated, it possesses the individual rather than serving them." Empaths caught in revenge fantasies waste their newfound power on destruction rather than using it for creation. They become what they once suffered under instead of transcending the entire dynamic. Pitfall 2. The superiority complex. Jung documented cases where awakened empaths developed what he called spiritual inflation, believing their sensitivity made them superior to unconscious people. They used their psychological insights to judge rather than understand, creating separation rather than connection. The truly awakened empath, Jung observed, maintains humility about their gifts. They understand that their sensitivity is a tool for service, not evidence of superiority. They use their abilities to build bridges rather than walls. Pitfall 3. The isolation justification. Some empaths use their awakening to justify complete withdrawal from society. They convince themselves that others are too unconscious to be worth engaging, which Jung recognized as spiritual bypassing rather than genuine development. Jung emphasized that true empathic awakening leads to conscious engagement, not conscious withdrawal. The awakened empath learns to navigate the unconscious world skillfully, rather than abandoning it entirely. Jung's framework for maintaining empathic awakening involves what he called conscious practices that keep the integrated empath connected to their power without losing their humanity. Practice 1. Daily discrimination. Jung taught awakened empaths to spend time each day distinguishing between their own emotional content and absorbed material from others. This prevents unconscious absorption while maintaining conscious sensitivity. Practice 2. Energy auditing. Regular assessment of where your energy flows and why. Jung observed that awakened empaths must remain vigilant about unconsciously slipping back into old patterns of indiscriminate giving. Practice 3. Shadow monitoring. Continued awareness of your own psychological blind spots. Jung emphasized that empathic awakening doesn't eliminate the shadow. It makes conscious relationship with it possible. Practice 4. Reality testing. Connection with other conscious individuals who can provide feedback about your perceptions. Jung noted that even awakened empaths benefit from external perspective to prevent inflation or projection. Jung discovered that successfully awakened empaths don't just transform their own lives, they become catalysts for consciousness evolution in everyone they encounter. Their presence gives others permission to be authentic. Their boundaries model healthy relationship. Their energy management demonstrates self-respect. But perhaps Jung's most profound insight about empathic awakening was its collective implications. He believed that empaths represent humanity's evolutionary edge, individuals whose consciousness is advancing beyond current collective limitations. Jung wrote in The Undiscovered Self, "The individual has always been the carrier of the living spirit, the one who brings about the change in society." Awakened empaths, he observed, serve as consciousness pioneers, showing others what becomes possible when sensitivity is wielded as power, rather than suffered as weakness. The awakened empath becomes living proof that you can feel everything without being destroyed by it, love deeply without losing yourself, give generously without depleting yourself. They demonstrate that sensitivity and strength are not opposites, but partners in conscious relationship. Jung's vision was of enough awakened empaths to reach what he called critical mass, the point where individual consciousness shifts become collective transformation. When enough empaths access their true power, they create what I call permission waves that help others do the same. But Jung also recognized the responsibility that comes with empathic awakening. He wrote, "To whom much is given, much is required." The awakened empath must use their abilities ethically, in service of growth rather than manipulation, healing rather than harm. The empathic superpowers Jung documented can be used to control and manipulate just as easily as they can be used to heal and serve. The awakened empath must choose consciousness over revenge, wisdom over superiority, engagement over withdrawal. Jung's final insight about empathic awakening addresses what he called the ultimate paradox. The moment empaths realize their power is the moment they understand they don't need to use it for personal gain. Their awakening creates such internal security that external validation becomes irrelevant. They become dangerous not because they want to hurt others, but because they can no longer be hurt by others. They become powerful not because they seek control, but because they achieve complete self-control. They become free not by escaping the world, but by engaging it consciously. But Jung warned about the responsibility that comes with empathic awakening. He documented cases where newly awakened empaths became intoxicated with their abilities, using their insights to judge rather than understand, to manipulate rather than heal. The shadow of empathic power is the temptation to become what you once suffered under. Jung wrote, "With great psychological power comes great ethical responsibility. The awakened empath must choose consciousness over revenge, wisdom over superiority, service over selfishness." They become guardians of their own integrity while using their abilities to serve collective healing. The awakened empath faces what Jung called the integration challenge. How do you maintain your empathic gifts without being overwhelmed by them? How do you love deeply without losing yourself? How do you serve others without depleting yourself? The answer, Jung discovered, lies in conscious choice rather than unconscious absorption. Jung observed that mastery-level empaths develop what he called emotional sovereignty. They can choose what to feel, when to feel it, and how deeply to engage with others' emotional states. This isn't emotional numbness, it's emotional mastery. They feel more deeply than ever, but they feel by choice rather than compulsion. Maria, one of Jung's long-term case studies, described this sovereignty. "I used to be like a radio picking up every emotional frequency in the room. Now I'm like a sophisticated sound system that can tune into specific channels, adjust the volume, and even turn off when I need silence. I feel everything, but I choose what I absorb." This emotional sovereignty creates what Jung called the empathic paradox. The more conscious an empath becomes about their abilities, the more powerful they become. But the more powerful they become, the more compassionate they grow toward those still trapped in unconscious patterns. Jung documented that awakened empaths often experience what he called the healing imperative, an overwhelming desire to help others who are still suffering in unconscious patterns. But he warned against what he termed the savior complex, the belief that you must rescue everyone from their unconsciousness. The truly awakened empath, Jung observed, learns to offer their gifts without attachment to outcomes. They become what he called conscious healers, who plant seeds of awareness without needing to control how or when those seeds grow. They trust others' capacity for growth while maintaining their own boundaries and well-being. Jung identified what he called the 5 stages of empathic mastery that occur after the initial awakening. Each stage deepens the empath's ability to use their gifts consciously while maintaining their psychological integrity. Stage 1. Conscious absorption. The awakened empath learns to absorb others' emotions intentionally rather than automatically. They can choose to feel what someone else is feeling for diagnostic purposes, then release that emotional content without it becoming part of their own experience. Stage 2. Strategic reflection. The empath develops the ability to reflect others' emotional states back to them in ways that promote awareness rather than defensiveness. They become living mirrors that help others see their psychological patterns clearly. Stage 3. Healing transmission. The empath learns to transmit emotional states that serve others' healing. They can emanate calm during chaos, stability during crisis, hope during despair. Their emotional presence becomes medicine for others' psychological wounds. Stage 4. Reality anchoring. The empath becomes a stable reference point for psychological truth in environments filled with confusion, manipulation, or delusion. Others naturally turn to them for clarity because their perception remains unclouded by emotional storms. Stage 5. Consciousness catalysis. At the highest level, the empath's mere presence catalyzes awakening in others. They don't have to do anything specific. Their integrated consciousness naturally invites others to examine their own patterns and choose greater awareness. Jung observed that empaths who reach the 5th stage of mastery become what he called evolutionary agents, individuals who contribute to the advancement of human consciousness simply by existing authentically. They model possibilities that others didn't know existed. But Jung also documented the challenges that mastery-level empaths face in a world still largely operating from unconscious patterns. Their clarity can be threatening to those invested in delusion. Their boundaries can be frustrating to those accustomed to unlimited access. Their authenticity can be disturbing to those hiding behind false personas. Jung called this the price of consciousness. The more aware you become, the more isolated you may feel from collective unconsciousness. But he also observed that this isolation is temporary. As empaths reach mastery, they naturally attract others who are ready for authentic connection and conscious relationship. The awakened empath becomes what Jung termed a consciousness beacon, someone who signals to other awakening souls that they're not alone in their journey toward authenticity. They create what I call permission fields, where others feel safe to drop their masks and show up truthfully. Jung's research revealed that awakened empaths often experience what he called the gift paradox. The more they give from their authentic power, the more power they have to give. Unlike unconscious giving that depletes, conscious giving from empathic mastery actually increases the empath's capacity for love, wisdom, and service. This happens because conscious giving aligns with what Jung called the natural flow of empathic energy. Instead of forcing themselves to give what they don't have, awakened empaths give from their abundance. Instead of sacrificing themselves for others, they share their overflow. This creates sustainable service that can continue indefinitely without burnout. Jung documented that mastery-level empaths develop what he called infinite compassion paired with finite availability. They can love everyone they encounter, while being available only to those who match their energy and respect their boundaries. This isn't selfishness. It's conscious resource management that ensures their gifts remain available for those who can receive them properly. The awakened empath learns to distinguish between those who want healing and those who want enabling. They can offer their gifts to those genuinely seeking growth, while remaining unavailable to those who want to use their empathy as a dumping ground for unprocessed emotional content. Jung observed that this discrimination creates what he called natural selection in the empath's relationships. People who genuinely appreciate empathic gifts while respecting empathic boundaries naturally remain in their orbit. Those who want to exploit empathic abilities without reciprocating care naturally drift away. This process, Jung noted, isn't about becoming cold or heartless. It's about becoming so full of authentic love that there's no room for dysfunction. The awakened empath's heart becomes like a refined instrument that resonates with truth and remains silent in the presence of manipulation. Jung's most profound insight about empathic awakening was about its collective implications. He realized that individual empathic awakening contributes to what he called morphic resonance in collective consciousness. When enough empaths access their true power, they create field effects that make it easier for others to do the same. The awakened empath becomes part of what Jung envisioned as humanity's evolutionary leap toward greater consciousness. They prove that sensitivity and strength can coexist, that love and boundaries can partner, that service and self-care can integrate. They become living examples of psychological possibilities that inspire others to transcend their own limitations. Jung believed that as more empaths complete their awakening, they reach what he called critical mass for consciousness evolution. Individual transformation becomes collective transformation. Personal healing becomes species healing. The awakened empath's gifts begin to influence larger systems, creating ripple effects that extend far beyond their personal relationships. But Jung emphasized that this evolutionary contribution happens naturally, without effort or agenda. The awakened empath doesn't have to try to change the world. Their consciousness automatically influences their environment in ways that serve collective growth. They become what he called unconscious teachers, whose very being educates others about authentic possibility. Remember where we started? Jung's discovery about the moment when an empath realizes their power and everything changes. The change isn't just personal transformation, it's evolutionary activation. When an empath awakens, they don't just heal themselves, they contribute to the healing of human relationship patterns that have been dysfunctional for millennia. Your sensitivity was never your weakness. It was your strength disguised as vulnerability, waiting for the right moment to reveal its true nature. Jung spent his life studying individuals who transcended their conditioning to access their authentic power. The awakened empath represents the pinnacle of this development. You were born with abilities that most people can't even imagine. You can feel truth underneath lies, sense authenticity beneath performances, detect love within fear. When you finally trust these abilities completely and use them consciously, you become exactly what Jung believed empaths were meant to be. Healers who heal from wholeness rather than woundedness. The moment you realize your power is the moment you understand you were never broken. You were never too much. You were never too sensitive. You were perfectly calibrated for a world that needed your gifts, but didn't know how to receive them properly. Everything changes because everything has to change. Your consciousness won't allow unconscious relationships anymore. Your awareness won't tolerate manipulation anymore. Your power won't enable dysfunction anymore. You become a force for consciousness that transforms every interaction through your very presence. Jung's most profound discovery was that the empath's journey isn't from sensitivity to strength. It's from unconscious sensitivity to conscious sensitivity. And conscious sensitivity, he realized, is the most powerful force in human psychology. The moment you realize your power, you don't become someone new. You become who you always were beneath the conditioning that taught you to doubt yourself. You become the awakened empath Jung documented in case after case, unmanipulable, unbreakable, and unstoppable in your service to consciousness evolution. Your awakening isn't just personal transformation, it's collective medicine. Every empath who realizes their power makes it easier for the next one to do the same. You become part of Jung's vision of individual consciousness serving universal healing. The moment the empath realizes their power, everything changes because everything must change. Unconsciousness cannot coexist with awakened empathic awareness. The old patterns dissolve not through force, but through the natural process of light replacing darkness. You are not too much for this world. You are exactly what consciousness evolution requires. The moment you realize this completely is the moment everything changes, not just for you, but for everyone your awakened presence touches. Jung's final words on empathic awakening. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. For the awakened empath, this means becoming the conscious, powerful, unstoppable force for healing they were always meant to be. Everything changes because you finally change from being unconsciously sensitive to being consciously powerful. And consciousness, Jung knew, always wins in the end.